I love that moment when the audience decides for me that we've begun. Good afternoon. Welcome back. I'm Charles Waldheim. It's my pleasure to serve as the John Irving Professor of Landscape Architecture, co-director of the Master Design Studies program here at the GSD. And it's my honor and pleasure to introduce my friend Daniel Barber. Beforehand, I just wanted to just acknowledge and congratulate Tom and Joe and Annie for a very stimulating day. Nice work, beautifully done. Also to Sarah and Matt and everyone on the ones and twos, you guys do an extraordinary job. The ability to be able to be in other places, in other contexts, and to be able to zoom in and follow along and then pop in and see sessions has been quite extraordinary. So please come on in, we just got started. A quick reminder, we have live captioning available this afternoon for our virtual and our in-person audiences. For those of you joining on the line, you can enable captions by clicking closed captioning at the bottom of your live stream window. And for those of you that are here in Piper Steps, live captioning is available through the QR code currently on screen. He hopes there's a screen. Thank you, Matt. Matt consistently bails me out of these. Thank you. Also an update on programming going forward. On October 7th and 8th, the Chicago-born architect and professor Jermaine Barnes will join us to explore connections between identity and the built environment. On the 8th, he will meet and reflect with, in conversation, members of the jury for the 2021 Wheelwright Prize, David Brown, David Hart, Mark Lee, Megan Panzano, and Samaya Valley. Please join us then. Daniel Barber is professor and chair of architecture theory and history at the Technical University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. He is an architectural historian whose research examines architecture and the emergence of environmental culture across the 20th century. You'll recall his 2016 A House in the Sun that really focused on the house as a type within modern architecture and the development of solar energy in the context of the Cold War. And of course, more recently, Modern Architecture and Climate, which has radicalized our understanding of air conditioning and its development. Daniel did his Master of Environmental Design at Yale, completed his PhD at Columbia, and what may be less well known about his biography is before he went off and got famous, he spent some time here with us as a fellow at the Center for Environment in the GSD, so it's a pleasure to welcome him back. He has been the recipient of an extraordinary number of awards and honors. His work could not be more timely. It occurred to me in reviewing the DDes conferences over the last several years, you could have done a keynote in about 2/3 of them. In my sense of the word. He has been a fellow at the von Humboldt Foundation and the Max Planck Institute. He's been a visiting fellow at the University of Sydney. He's been the Barron Visiting Professor at Princeton, and notably a recipient of the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship. Please welcome Daniel Barber.
Thanks, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here. Thanks for that introduction. Add my thanks to, sorry, things are moving, to the organizers and our hosts for really just such a fascinating day. Really a pleasure to have been here. And I should say, over the day, if you might have, probably didn't notice, but I was in the back a little bit, kind of tapping away, making a few shifts to the discussion that I want to have today, which is in part to say I've sort of changed my title. So I wouldn't say ignore that, but maybe add to that, my new title is Out of Time, okay? So this is kind of something I'm gonna work with. Yeah, so I wanna sort of stage a discussion. I wanna stage a discussion about sort of how we feel inside buildings, right? And I wanna start by kind of asking everyone to just kind of think about whether or not you are comfortable or how comfortable you might be. We had some discussions earlier about the relative chill in this room. You know, it almost always comes up in a conference, oh, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too humid. Of course, congratulations on your almost new facade that might manage some of that. But, you know, we can see some of the, well, I can't see them because the lights are too glaring, but maybe you can. Some of the ventilation registers, right, not quite hidden by this kind of screen, but somehow sort of above something else, right? I mean, this kind of presence of this infrastructure that's a persistent part of our lives. So I want to talk through a couple of things and help us to kind of think, I hope, or to bring in and kind of tease out and entangle, probably not disentangle, some of the issues that came up today around the ethics of sensing, around the sort of relative value of new methods and new knowledge, around the question of architecture's position today relative to climate, of course, and even the history of the room, right, and the kind of questions of enclosure that have emerged since. And so, I really want us to kind of, again, as I'm talking, I'm hoping you might kind of stay attentive to the thermal spaces we're in, right? The kind of hum that's somewhat overwhelmed by my voice, that's on the list there, right? And the kind of ways that we kind of imagine ourselves feeling, the way you might think you're going to feel later in some other spaces that you occupy, or maybe you had some comfort challenges earlier today. Because I think what I want to do is try to sort of spin out and help us think differently about the role of architecture, specifically around this question of comfort, right? And kind of use comfort as a kind of hinge or a sort of means of opening out some of these questions around sensing, but equally some questions around sort of how we can reimagine the ways that we're living in these spaces. And sorry, I just have a note. It says it's not a touch screen, and I'm trying to figure out how I get through to different slides. Because I thought it looked like a touch. Oh, just do that here. But to skip a slide? But if I wanted to skip one, is that? Well, you're just going to see them all. I'm not able to jump to one that's later, as far as you know. Okay, this is going to be interesting.
You can ask us to close our eyes.
Yeah, well, we'll just see a lot of images really fast, because this is a slide deck that I've used in many different contexts, and so. Oh boy, I think there's about 75 slides in here, but we're only going to look at about 20. So anyway, yeah, when I asked the question earlier about the kind of carbon accounting of sensor technology, and some of the discussion that emerged was really around the kind of entanglements that such a question produces. Oh, I'm going to be saved. Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, great. I'm sorry, just give me 1 second to make sure I know what I'm getting into here. Okay, so yeah, the kind of entanglements that question of sort of what about the carbon, right? And that's a kind of set of entanglements, and I think that Andrew even referred to a kind of void in the scholarship, right? A kind of empty space that we're trying to open up. How do we manage our kind of collective reliance on carbon as a discipline, as a profession, certainly as a sort of broader global culture with many different variations? How do we sort of measure the benefits of expanded knowledge in architecture and elsewhere relative to the impact on our lives and on future lives, right? Of course, most often here in the over-carbonized North, the impacts that we're talking about based on excessive carbon are not affecting us, right? We're quite carefully conditioned and held within this space, but have other sort of impacts, which I'll kind of come back to in a minute. But my point here, again, still sort of introducing, is that this sort of entanglement, right? This sort of what do we do with that question is something that's been sort of a cloud over my head as I've been traveling around the world the past few years. How do we sort of negotiate this as a field again and in the ways that we think about the role of architecture in the world? So I want to talk about some projects that I've been working on that focus around the production of thermal knowledge, around comfort again, around how our experience of interior space resonates across pasts and futures, how our experience of interior space produces futures, right? And one of the kind of key questions to what I'm trying to get at is, does this present have a future, right? Or do we sort of have to shift what we're doing to rethink that set of dynamics? And I want to think about this kind of question of how we live and how we live inside in the context of the just transition, right? And I'm not going to pick apart that term too carefully, but I just want to pose it as the sort of framework that we're operating in. I'm going to get into some details, but part of this, again, is to just sort of really think about how this question of justice and transition shifts the framework for architecture, for architectural knowledge, for architectural engagement. Okay, a bit of an extended preamble. But here we are. So out of time, right? Remember, this is our title. So I'm assuming a few things, right? I'm assuming that, and I should say, I think the last time I presented here about 8 years ago, I don't think you could assume all of this, right? So this is kind of one marker already. That we are all aware of the implications of the built environment on the continued rise of carbon emissions, right? The continued rise of carbon emissions from the building sector, despite whatever we might call we're all aware of the kind of role of buildings as a sort of part of what Imre Zeman and many others have referred to as petroculture. Right, and even more so, I'll sort of play that out for a second to recognize that I think we're increasingly aware of a way in which buildings are operating as media, in the sense not only as sort of images or sort of representations of those cultural commitments, right, but as the kind of medium for the processing of energy, right? I mean, we can in some sense see buildings as sort of social mechanisms that facilitate the drawing of resources out of the ground, whether they be oil or natural gas or others, processing them within buildings and sort of making them relevant to our lives, largely through those registers that we were just referring to, right? And then, of course, producing carbon emissions and destroying the planet. So how buildings are quite intimately kind of implicated, right, in that set of discussions. So we can read buildings to kind of understand who we are and our commitments, right? Again, we know that the built environment professions and academic discussions are deeply implicated in the climate emergency, right? So what I want to, again, sort of play out then is kind of thinking about the temporal frames that allow us to operate within that space, right? I've just returned from a workshop with a global group of colleagues in London, convened by the British Academy around the theme of time and the just transition. It helped me to think through, in particular with Carrie Facer and Arturo Escobar, some of the colleagues in that context, sort of the way we sort of map and model and kind of provide parameters, right, to the kind of temporal frames that we're allowing to help us think about this shift, right? Which is to say, in effect, what is the frame, what is the sort of temporal frame of the transition, and how does sort of shifting that frame change this sort of question of justice, right? One sort of piece there is that if we look at a short frame, we might say, oh, okay, lithium batteries instead of combustion engines, that's a great solution, right? We're gonna all get electric cars. I mean, one could imagine such a thing, right? But if we extend that frame and take into account not only the sort of obvious pollution and the decimation of ecologies, the weight of the cars on the road and the need for extra maintenance and on and on and on, right? As we extend that temporal frame, what seemed like a solution starts to become a bit more problematic, right? In this sense, this transition that we're in the midst of will be uncomfortable, right? Psychologically and physiologically on many levels, the way we live inside has direct consequences, again, for the kind of ways in which that comfort emerges. The ambition, the transition could be many things, right? It could be violent, it could be inequitable, it could be disruptive, it could be smooth and sort of business as usual with minor inflections. The ambition in any case is to make it just, right? And what I want to really kind of zero in on today has to do with this question of justice in the thermal interior. And what I'm showing here is a model from the UN in 2023, where they're kind of mapping out these different overshoot scenarios, right? And some of you may be more in tune with this than others, but the kind of plan that the UN has, right, is that we will continue to emit carbon so as to reduce social and economic disruption. And sometime in the future, by virtue of the brilliant scientists here in this university and others, we'll draw that carbon down from the atmosphere and sort of return to some semblance of normalcy, right? I don't want to malign any of those scientists, right? But we don't yet have the capacity to draw that down. As Fortune magazine referred to it, it's more of a kind of mom and pop shop on the corner than a Walmart, right? The kind of capacity of that technology. So we're sort of operating in this premise that we will continue to emit and draw that down, when in fact we're not quite sure how we will draw that down, right? And for those of us in this room, and not to discount our kind of children and potential grandchildren and on, this period of the so-called overshoot, right, when the carbon is too high and we haven't yet drawn it down, is the period of the rest of our lives, of the lives of our students, without kind of getting into family relations maybe. An indication that's made very clear, if I can remember which button to press. There we go. Made very clear here, again, kind of thinking about this temporal frame, sort of when were you born and what are the impacts, right? How long does your life extend and how does that sort of map a relationship to these kind of terrors of climate change, right? So we want this transition to be just, right? We want this transition to be just in the sense of considering who is responsible. We talked about responsibility before, who benefits and who loses. How can we repair the damage? Right? What is the sort of medium for the expression of justice, and how do we play it out on those terms? One of those media I'm going to consider is not just buildings, but also, again, the kind of air we breathe. Urgency and justice, right? I mean, these are issues that go together with some difficulty, right? It's generally understood for good reason that the sort of claiming of an emergency is an opportunity to increase injustice, right? To increase oppression. Like it's an urgent, we got to get it done. We can't kind of worry about all the people that may or may not get impacted, right? Of course, other models of this, again, that extend that temporal frame recognize that if we're going to extend our action or delay our action somewhat relative to the emergency today, then we're not maybe compromising the lives of people in the present so much. We're shifting that to the future people, right? We're shifting that to others that we don't yet know, that don't get taken into account in economic equations, et cetera. So again, this kind of dynamic between emergency, urgency, and justice is one of the aspects that we want to sort of keep around. When we have a wider frame and can really sort of think about the future consequences of our actions, right, of our buildings, think about how we sort of begin to imagine the future, right? How do we again kind of think about the way that we're operating today and the future that can emerge from it, both in terms of the actions that we're producing, right, and the kind of framework by which we see ourselves operating within these possible futures. Okay. Just give me one more. Okay, so let's talk about thermal comfort and this anonymous dude here. When we think about this sort of justice embedded in this possible transition, I think in part we're talking about the question of comfort, right? And again, part of what I'm trying to do is see this kind of concept of comfort that I'm going to talk around as a sort of hinge for thinking this through. How the so-called comfort zone might have emerged, right, as the result of what we would now see as sort of pathetic sensors, but sensors nonetheless. How it was engineered as a space of stasis, out of time, right? A space out of time. I mean, we can sit in this auditorium in any weather, right? I assume it's relatively robust as the building, at least in that context. The weather can change around us, but we will sort of do the same thing, right? We are in that sense kind of out of time. Who is this person, right, that we're looking at who's sort of being made comfortable by these various factors? Why are they comfortable? How do we know that they're comfortable? The conceit that this sort of diagram, and there are hundreds of others that one could show from the period, that this sort of diagram that's attempting to kind of model, right, an individual within a very abstracted space, of course, to understand the dynamics of architecture's relationship to comfort, how this becomes a generative diagram of the conditioned future, right? How this becomes a kind of recipe for thinking about the types of spaces that we inhabit, the kind of, again, the stasis of the comfort zone. So I want to play this out for a minute. Oops, that's still him. That's cool. He's looking good. Play this out for a minute initially through a comparison. And what I'm going to do for the remainder of my time is talk through this comparison very quickly, show two other projects, and then open up to some discussions. A comparison that I think just sort of gives us a baseline for some possible productive ways to think about this, right? The building on the left, designed by Pietro Beluschi, as you see in 1947, the Equitable Insurance Tower, a whole interesting history of equitable insurance buildings could be written, often seen as the first sealed curtain wall tower, right? There's some contestation there, but an early one, let's say, right? Built, that is, right after World War II. Right, and the story goes like this, that the Boeing Aircraft Company, of course, was building planes and other sorts of products for the war effort and diverting a lot of energy, increasing the throughput of energy into the Northwest region in order to maximize its productive capacity. Once the war was over, right, there was a kind of question of what do we do with this kind of surplus of energy, right? And part of the answer was we build buildings that require it, right? We build buildings that are engineered and designed and engineered quite directly to use as much energy as possible, right? And I'm not saying that in some sort of, what a stupid architect, but rather what a brilliant design that resonates with the demands of the time, right? Of course, we have very different demands today. But we see the kind of emergence of the steel, concrete, and glass sort of structures, obviously still wildly prevalent today. Hard to imagine a more carbon-hungry way of building, right? And kind of begins to indicate the way in which our designs are so embedded in some of these other social processes. But Pietro, the designer of the building, reflecting on it in the late 40s, said that our, quote, our assumptions were affected by the peculiar circumstances found in our Northwest region, cheap power, as I just described, and a tremendously expanded production of light metals for war use, which will beg for utilization after the emergency, end quote, right? The emergency being the war. So again, a sort of proposal that we continue this state of emergency through the expansion of the built environment, right? Through the kind of, not only expansion of the buildings themselves and let's say the kind of materials and the kind of weight of concrete, right? But also the kind of expansion of the demands, of the resource demands of the built environment. I'll get to the other building in a minute, but here you can see the interior. One of the early rooms that was kind of fully sealed, right? That you couldn't live in without HVAC system, without a mechanical system, much like the hotel room I'm staying in today, right? I'm sure many of us have experienced this. You know, how do I change the temperature? It's often not quite clear. Even just to kind of think about this, so we're seeing this kind of, you know, sealed interior space, of course, this kind of elegant curtain wall on the exterior, but just to kind of briefly sort of expand this out, and I'm going to do this very quickly, of some other sort of emblematic structures or sort of emblematic indications, right? I mean, here, of course, the well-known UN Tower, carefully analyzed by Farzan Lotfi-Jam and Caitlin Blanchfield in a great book, Modern Management Methods, right? Yeah, that was good stuff. In part, one of the small stories of that book is, you know, the kind of catastrophe of the mechanical system here. It didn't really work very well and has been renovated, I think, 7 times. But we see, you know, the image on the left of this sort of gesture of adjusting temperature, right? And there's a lot going on here. On the one hand, the sick building syndrome has been almost exclusively resonant across administrative women, right? Women in administrative roles, sorry, I should say, in some of these office buildings, which is to say, we don't see it so much here because there's actually a window that does open right there. But in many cases, the secretarial staff was placed in interiors of some of these high-rise towers, right? The kind of concentrations of toxicity that would often circulate around there, so leading to illness and in some cases death. But the main point here is just this capacity, right, to just sort of shift the weather, right, shift the interior by virtue of turning this dial within this interior space. Right, the other sort of emblematic building here, I don't even need to have the label, I'm sure, the Seagram's Tower in Manhattan, another fully sealed space with the sort of conundrum of the heating system right at the edge, right, sort of barely warming up the Midtown Manhattan in the winter season because that curtain wall is so thin, right? And again, it used to be sort of a fun game to say, do we all know how poorly performing the Seagram's building is, right? It got a 3 out of 100 on an analysis in 2009. Kiel Mo has sort of written that story for us so definitively that we just sort of bow to that knowledge. But a recognition that this sort of model, right, I mean, part of my point here is that this sort of model of the skyscraper, of course, then proliferates around the world, steel, glass, and concrete, completely reliant upon air conditioning, of course, with a wide number of regional variations and many other nuances. But just to sort of package this, right, as a kind of a set of practices and set of ways of thinking about the world, again, that aspires to be out of time, right, that aspires to be producing this space that is enclosed, secured, conditioned, almost sort of, I mean, it's not quite impenetrable, right, but in terms of these kind of questions of comfort and conditioning, has pretty robust borders. So to our other example on the right. A building built by Emi Roberto in 1945 in Rio de Janeiro, and you can even see here an image if you happen to have been to the Copacabana beach. You know, it's now all hotels and high-rise towers. This was one of the early ones, right? So again, we recognize this as a kind of emergence, right? As a kind of early moment in thinking about buildings and how we operate differently. A moment here where Brazil was really actively aiming to sort of enter into the global economy in different ways, right? And again, saw architecture and a certain type of modern architecture as one way to do that. But we're not going to get into all those details. We're going to look for a minute a bit more carefully at this section, right? And of course, we see the kind of standard section on the left, and then what I like to think of as a seasonal section on the right. Yeah, a section that sort of allows for different types of interaction and variation. You know, you see it even called out, I mean, here in English. So the Brazilians are putting it in English because they're sending this around the world and it's published in an architectural forum, et cetera, as a means to kind of, this is how we operate, right? These are the kind of the ways that we're thinking about architecture differently. But, you know, you can imagine, sorry, let me get to a better image for this. maybe not. That's right. You can imagine kind of sitting just behind that facade and sort of enjoying an evening breeze, right? The sun comes down at noon, it's hitting those fixed veins, right? When the sun comes at 6, maybe you lower the sunscreen. There's a sort of dynamic, almost a choreography with the relative to the individual on the interior, their relative levels of comfort, and the climate conditions on the exterior, and then really this, again, the facade as the mediating device, right? I mean, another means by which it plays itself out as media. Important to note in this structure in particular, that sort of fantasy I just had about kind of you sit there and enjoy yourself and engage with the facade. Probably this would be done by the domestic help in these apartments, right? So there's a kind of another layer of a different kind of alienation from your climate systems in this context, right? That has to do with other economic structures and structures of labor. But one of the things that we recognize, and then the term that I like to use for this is the kind of emergence of a broad concept of what I've been calling thermal practices, right? And as I talk about this, I'm just going to click through a few more of these buildings from Brazil in this period to kind of understand the potentials of this dynamic facade. Thermal practices, which is to say an approach that recognizes that it's both the architect who's designing the project and the inhabitant or user or resident who's engaged within it who are producing its thermal conditions, right? The ways that you interact with that facade, the ways that you might open it up or close it down, the ways that you might move from one room to another in a different part of the year. And in fact, in a number of courses that I've been teaching lately, I've been using this concept of thermal practices as a way to talk the students through different ways of kind of thinking about how they inhabit their apartments, right? How they live in the world in different ways according to different seasons. And in almost every case, I should say, some of the discussions that we have are about my father or grandfather or aunt or somebody, as I was doing this assignment, was talking about how, back in the old days, we didn't just turn on the heater, we moved into this room in the winter and that room in the summer, or, I kind of stayed near the fire, or I just put on a sweater, right? All of these other sort of tacit experiences and sort of modes of living that air conditioning has kind of taken from us, right? Or at least has diminished and made less relevant, seemingly less relevant to our daily lives. So I'm not going to talk through these in detail, but you can just sort of see this sort of modeling of the experience in this case on the one on the left, an additional aspect where she's speculating as to how the foods she's eating is also transforming the way that her body feels thermally, right? And how that relates to the spatial dynamics of the room, et cetera. But one of the things, right, the story that we know, and again, just to sort of putting this comparison on the table, just to sort of, let's say, get us on the same page. But if we think about some of the buildings that we've just quickly looked through, and let's just pop in at this one again, relative to these Brazilian examples, again, recognizing the dynamism, right? You can see it on the image of the facade on the right here. On the one hand, of course, different solar exposures are getting different facade treatments, but even a sense of, some are open, some are closed. You can see in some of these diagrams, one could read them through to understand the kind of 6 different ways of shifting the ways that the sun enters into the space, right? And of course, these were, relative to air conditioning, these are almost negligible in terms of their thermal transformation, right? I mean, once we get put into that context, and they were often also a lot about light, right? And a lot about sort of access to daylight. But even more difficult as we think about these two different historical trajectories is the recognition that these shading systems and their dynamism and their sort of capacity to open up these other possibilities were foreclosed quite directly by the intrusion of air conditioners, by the insertion of air conditioners into these systems, and that sort of elegant sort of protruding eave almost, right, that's helping to shade some of these structures is all cleared out and used as the kind of structural foundation for clamping on chillers, right? So for sort of automating, or not automating, but mechanizing this system. So I just want to cycle back then for a quick second to this guy before I move forward. Again, to suggest that when we're talking about comfort, we're not obviously just talking about how we feel in a room, right? We're talking about the systems that feed into that. We're talking about the kind of extension of those systems into the energy extraction and energy processing and distribution that relate to them, into the forms of regulatory and assessment knowledge that helps us to sort of articulate the specifics of the comfort zone, right, and kind of normalize that space, again, sort of keep it out of time, keep it consistent. And this is one of the things that I think becomes really important to recognize, is that when we're thinking through how comfort gets produced, the model that we've used, the model that was produced in the 1950s and 60s that I'm showing you some images from here, you know, the dude looks pretty comfortable, right? The model is one of stasis, right? The model, again, is one of out of time. The model is one of consistency. And in many ways, that's the kind of environmental, or the kind of extent of the environmental harm has come as much from that need for consistency as the specifics of any different given sort of sense of comfort, right? And there's a piece here that I'm not going to do about revolving doors, right? And the kind of capacity for revolving doors to maintain that stasis, which also kind of suggest that the buildings that they are facing often are conditioned day and night, right? I mean, we maybe all know in our experiences of the urban environment in particular, and many commercial spaces that maintain, keep the air conditioning on day and night, not only because, they care for the well-being of the janitor or who might be coming in at night, for example, but also because the materials and systems and methods that we've used to design and construct buildings are also reliant on that stable temperature and humidity conditions, right? So, Alan Weisman's fabulous book, The World Without Us, that came out about a decade ago now, maybe a decade and a half, that sort of starts with this idea of if suddenly humans disappeared, what would happen to the world around us? And the kind of first few pages are about the kind of infestation of mold that's going to happen when buildings stop being, when the humidity in buildings stops being controlled through mechanical means, right? Just the kind of thousands of years of mold that will take over. So to really think about this man and the other man that we've seen a minute ago as emblematic of this kind of aspiration for persistent comfort that has kind of consumed our field, often in the background or underneath or, kind of hidden behind a sort of a feeble screen, but nonetheless very much a part of what we do. And we don't, we also can recognize in both of these images, it's a white guy, he's got a suit on, right? There's a very specific model for who this consistency is for, and of course the histories have been written about the emergence of the carrier company and the kind of air-conditioned models and the ASHRAE standards that emerged in part, I mean, it's a lot more nuanced than this, but it emerged in part out of kind of experiments on male undergrads at Yale in the teens and 20s. But one of the most important things that we think about, that we have to think about when we think about this question of comfort and justice and temporality, right, is that most of the kind of models for comfort that we've developed have been for a very thin demographic, right, a very narrow demographic, and have been sort of universalized and normalized around the world. Okay, so that allows me to jump then to the second project I want to talk about, and hopefully to speed up a little bit, but we'll see how it goes. The second project I want to talk about, which has emerged from some of this discussion of comfort, which I've largely drawn from my book, Modern Architecture and Climate, into a discussion of what we've been calling after comfort, right? And I just want to be clear that when I'm saying after comfort, I'm not saying you should, well, some of you maybe, but you should not be comfortable. I'm saying that model of that dude sitting on the chaise smoking his pipe without a care in the world is something that we have to move past, right? And we all probably look at that and kind of chuckle and, well, that's not how I live, but that's what the engineering kind of helps us to do, right? I mean, that's the kind of model that we have become accustomed to. So, around the same time, Richard Neutra, in 1947, thinking about this question, there has, of course, always been comfort in the world, reckless comfort, we could say, comfort based on someone else's continuous labor, right? Which is in part to say that there's always a cost, right? That comfort is not a universal condition, comfort is for some and not for others, right? And as we, sorry, I'm a little overwhelmed by my slides. As we talk through this, I'm going to look through some of the projects that have come from an editorial project I've been working on with a number of colleagues that you see listed in the sort of top row there, including the wonderful Jeanette Kuo, who used to teach here for a number of years. enlisted these colleagues and commissioned articles from a number of contributors, from architects, engineers to artists and others, as a means to sort of think through how we can really begin to imagine a world that exceeds the conditions that we've become accustomed to, how we can really, they're supposed to be, there we go. How we can really begin to imagine this world in terms of the kind of emergence of a different kind of life after comfort that we can begin to embrace. But the point I want to sort of tease out of this for a second, the kind of specific question about after comfort that I just want to briefly talk through, has to do with this question again of justice, right? And has to do with the kind of inequities that comfort is another index for, right? Some people get to be comfortable, some people don't, right? And the kind of indications of that have a lot to do with kind of levels of economic viability, right? Have a lot to do with region, have a lot to do with predilection. But we want to be very, very clear that this sort of this sort of expectation that there is a sort of universal comfort model that can apply to many different contexts and regions and people, right, has not only been sort of physiologically and scientifically kind of pushed back against, but also really loses a lot of opportunities for a new kind of architectural dynamism. But I also want to think about, for a second, right, if we start to talk about, back to Neutra's quote about continuous labors, right, and again, things that we all, I hope, sort of know, right, which is when you turn on the air conditioner, or I mean, for that matter, when you turn on the light switch or flush the toilet or, you know, whatever you might be doing, well, maybe not the toilet, but when you turn on the air conditioner, turn on the light switch, you're enacting a sort of, you know, a chain of causal transformations. Right? There's energy being drawn out of the ground that is being processed and burned in some capacity, and often right, going into the air as carbon emissions and transforming the potential for life on the planet. Right? So we want to be really thoughtful about not only how we feel in a given space, but how that kind of experience also has resonance across this broader frame and into the future, right? And this is back to that question of the temporal frame. But I think we want to start thinking about questions like climate and comfort in terms of what the UN refers to as loss and damage, right? How do we begin to repay and repair? Those of us, if I can be so bold as to put us all into this category, given that we're where we are, those of us who have benefited from the over-carbonized economies of the global north, for the past couple of decades, again, have a certain responsibility that suggests we might kind of think about different ways that we can shift our relationship to comfort so as to allow for others to benefit and self-realize over time in the near future. There it is, okay. Okay, so I want to talk about one more project and then open up to some questions. I think I'm doing pretty good. Actually, I'm doing better than I thought. A film that I made with Nick Axel and Juan Benavides as kind of an offshoot from some of the After Comfort work that is on display right now for another 2 weeks or so at the International Architectural Biennale in Rotterdam, the IABR, curated by Jana Bikströth and a number of others. A film that we made called Climate Portraits, New Institute, and I'm going to show two films. The first one's really short, and then I'll introduce the second one, but just because it's here.
And I know I finally accepted that air conditioning is a privilege, not a right.
So it's nice to have your research taken up in such a, public context. But, oh, sorry, can we go to the other film? You can just press play and, oh, there we go, okay. I'm going to jump in, yeah. So just to tell the story of this project for a minute, we were invited by the curators to participate in the Rotterdam Biennale, and had an initial idea to, the Biennale opened at the end of June, to encourage or request that the Institute would turn down or turn off their air conditioning periodically and at certain times, or maybe perhaps according to a sort of heat index or something like that, right? Like when it gets too hot, you don't turn up the air conditioning, you close the museum, right? And then maybe you reopen it at 11 o'clock at night or something like that. Adjust our patterns, adjust our thermal practices, right, away from these kind of insistence upon consistency and regularity and normativity, and rather kind of how can we adapt ourselves and sort of adopt different practices according to these changing thermal needs, right? So that was our initial idea was, hey, can we turn off your air conditioner, right? You can imagine, on the one hand, that a sort of a museum or a space that displays art would be quite we've become quite anxious about that, and in fact, the Noy Institute, as you may know, has a huge archive. They got very anxious. We were like, no, we don't want to turn off that part, but of course it's all connected. In any event, one of the things we discovered in talking to them about turning off the air conditioner was that they were about to replace it, right? They were in the process of changing out their system and putting in a new system, of course, a more efficient one, and all of the things you would expect. But part of what we became interested then is sort of how does that transition, what brought that transition about? I mean, obviously there's economic aspects, right? The cost of the replacement, or perhaps the overwhelming costs of energy that because of the inefficiency of the older system. But also there's the experience, right? Also there's the kind of relative level of comfort or the kind of experience of the interior. So given that we didn't have the capacity to turn the air conditioner off, we just sort of documented, and you'll see bits of this more explicitly in just a minute, documented that replacement of the system, right? And brought into this discussion of changing the air conditioner different sort of experiences of how they sort of occupy this building. And we'll see sort of bits of this, but the Noy Institute has both a kind of relatively straightforward gallery volume, a weird sort of, we're seeing it there, a weird sort of 3-story kind of mini skyscraper, and then an archival sort of bank across the back. So very different needs across the different times and the different spaces. And I'm going to jump to a different. I can't see anything. It's just me. It's just because I'm old. Oh yeah, this is the mimic. Well, okay. Well, we'll leave it there. And again, part of this is on the one hand sort of thinking about how do we reveal, how do we think through, how do we sort of publicize and unearth the ways that we live through buildings, the ways that we live in buildings according to these sort of comfort differentials and comfort mechanisms. How do we adapt, right? I think it's not here, but there was a large discussion about the basement offices, which were sort of seen as, I mean, that's a lot of the hospitality and janitorial staff, and kind of not the places that everyone wants to be on some seasons, but then when it gets really hot, everybody wants to be in the basement because it's much cooler. And in fact, they even they changed the kind of layout of this sort of lounge room in there to accommodate more chairs and so on seasonally, right? So these kind of simple adjustments that allow for these transitions. But the other part that comes into play, and this will be my last thought before opening out to some conversation, part of the project here as well was recognizing or sort of aspiring and hoping, along with the very collaborative and generous colleagues at the Noy Institute, that these sorts of cultural institutions, and I think in principle one could say the same about universities, educational institutions, although they tend to be a bit larger, but these sorts of cultural institutions can often be spaces for experimentation and new ways of living. Right, that we have the building stock that we have. How do we use it differently and creatively without kind of transforming or overwhelming further overwhelming our carbon budget? And in fact, the Noy Institute has developed a sort of framework that they refer to as a zooperative, right? Which is to say a cooperative whose foundation is the sort of production of life, right? More than human life, and there's a whole, it's called the zoop for short, and it's, it's one of these things like you can be, a certain kind of business, right? And you can sort of claim this and put a little stamp on your letterhead, et cetera, to suggest that your, every decision that you make takes into account the natural world that surrounds you, right? So, the premise is to bring into the kind of relevant meetings what they refer to as a speaker for the living, right? Who helps to sort of negotiate some of these issues that might not always become apparent to those who are just concerned with, I mean, we're also living, right? But concerned with the human rather than the more than human life forms that surround us. This is a great bit for a while here with kind of talking about archives. And actually it came out, we were able to, at the opening, we were able to publish on eFlux, where this After Comfort series has been playing out, an article by Mal Ahern about the kind of history of conditioning in museums, and she has this great project that, I mean, she could do this much better, but it suggests that basically the emergence of modern painting required air conditioning, right? And has a number of great examples from the Museum of Modern Art of the need for turning up the air conditioning for some of the thickness of paint on those canvases to make sure that they don't decay, right? And so really, again, thinking about these sort of petrocultural aspects of the ways of life that we have in the buildings we live in. So again, to imagine that part of sort of my job as a scholar, kind of thinker around some of these issues, and I think it relates to some of the broader questions around the discipline, is how to encourage and sort of catalyze experiments in different ways of living inside, right? Different sort of kinds of thermal practices, how these spaces become a kind of opportunities to kind of think that through in different ways, right? So we're doing another project at the Martel Foundation in sort of central France next May, who's just done a renovation, and another, again, sort of writing these proposals and saying, I want to come there and talk to you about how uncomfortable you are, and some people respond, right? So I think I might leave it there and just sort of hope to have inspired some thoughts about some of these issues and open up to some conversations. We could maybe leave the film playing.
Thanks, right. Daniel. There's a mic down here. It's going to come around to you. Daniel has agreed to stay at the podium. But just to open up, I was intrigued by you ending on the archive in the museum, right? So I had two thoughts. One was a flashback to when I was a visiting fellow at the Canadian Centre for Architecture. In their archives, in the basement of that amazing building, I was informed that as a guest in the archives, in the event of fire, their system would evacuate all the oxygen and we would all perish, but the archive would be saved. So that's one extreme, let's say. More recently, my friends at the Gardner Museum have told me in conservation science that this mid-century focus on reduction of humidity to almost nothing and the chilling down of works on paper and paintings from before the 20th century is a real problem, actually. Yeah. And the American Association of Museums is beginning to adjust their notions of, if not comfort, the kind of archival quality.
Can I just jump in on that for a second? Because the fascinating thing there, and in fact, I think it comes up somewhere in this conversation. I mean, I'll put it a bit, I'll sort of overstate it, but it doesn't matter so much what the heat and humidity is in the sense of the archive. It matters that it's consistent, right? It's the changes that cause the damaging effects, right? And I like that in part, kind of the reason I jumped in, because there's this kind of sense of, that's how we're sort of treating ourselves, right? As these kind of careful archival objects that can't kind of handle these transformations in terms of the types of conditioning we are coming.
I wanted to start with the first question, and it really has to do with that notion of temporal spaces, right? Comfort man is in this zone, which is atemporal. And it strikes me that one of the things that you implied, you kind of walked up to, but I want to draw you out on, is the implication is that not only have those standards rendered us kind of all of the same gender and class, of the same temporal stasis, they also have precluded certain forms of pleasure. You haven't talked a lot about pleasure tonight, but you sort of walked right up on that balcony in Rio to the sense of the bodily pleasure of the potential of other thermal experiences. And is there a potential liberatory or emancipatory quality to what you're advocating?
I mean, yes and no, right? I think, I guess I would kind of think of, on the terms of the discipline, yes, right? If I could put it that way, right? Which is, I think that, there's a kind of sense of breaking off the shackles of decades of formalism and trying to understand kind of what's going on in the world and how can we play along, right? And again, some of the discussions we were having earlier around some related questions. I think that part of what we're looking for are avenues for lines of flight, right? To use the somewhat tired Deleuzean term, right? I mean, to produce something, to produce difference, right? How do we really sort of produce and kind of imagine a different world? If I resist a little bit the question of pleasure, I guess part of what I'm trying to get to, and it's not to say that pleasure and comfort are at all the same thing, right? But is that I think that part of what I'm hoping to encourage here is that we can all sort of embrace discomfort, right? I mean, we could turn off the air conditioner and be uncomfortable in this space, and that would be okay, right? I mean, assuming there's nobody in here with COVID, right? And all sorts of other caveats that one would have to make, right? Because our spaces are clearly not fit to purpose for such an intervention, right? But to recognize that rather than, I mean, again, sort of, and there's a, Lisa Hirschon's book, Thermal Delight, from, I mean, it's now almost 40, 50 years old, right? But a brilliant sort of intervention in thinking about, and the physiological research that has made it very clear that, in fact, this static thermal environment is very unhealthy, right? And it's better to kind of get all these sorts of changes. And Thomas Auer, one of the collaborators on the After Comfort project, has been playing that out on a sort of climate engineering context. But so I guess I'm a little too panicked or maybe I don't feel like we.
I can tell that my
have the luxury of pleasure right?
has made you uncomfortable, so I'll withdraw it. There are microphones on the sides, and you can manage it from the podium.
Yeah. Everybody's comfortable.
Nobody's talking, so I'm jumping. What I understand of the beginning of this conference, that was a very shocking intervention, and this keynote. What I get the sense that time is running out, and that this is a little bit inevitable. So, or we get used to discomfort, or else. And I think, and I don't know if that's why you don't want, you don't want to get too comfortable with the notion of pleasure, because this is a danger zone that we're in.
I mean, certainly in a danger zone. I think that part of the issue that we're coming to terms with is either we get used to discomfort by design, right? Which is to say, we see it as a space for creative engagement and opportunity. Again, how much can we turn the air conditioner up or down, or the heater up or down, right, and sort of still be okay? What does that mean, to still be okay, right? I had a great moment, this was a couple of years ago now too, but a kind of heat wave when I was living in Philadelphia, and made a sort of a bet with a colleague in Baltimore of sort of who could work without an air conditioner the longest in a kind of August heat wave in the East Coast, right? And embarrassingly, he lasted longer than I did, right? But when we were discussing it later, it became clear it was because I had tenure, right? And it didn't matter if I wrote another article or not, and he was pre-tenure, and So, which is to say, and I'm saying that in the sense that part of our allegiance to comfort is around questions of productivity and the optimization of labor, and a whole other world, a world of entanglements of, this kind of void of parameters, a whole other world of entanglements about how we live and what our priorities are, what our aspirations are, and how we want to get to them, right? But yeah, I think the premise is that either we're going to be relatively discomforted, perhaps sort of mitigated by design interventions, or we're going to be uncomfortable by virtue of not having done that, right? So either by design or by default. I don't think we're in a danger zone, because danger suggests that there's something coming and it's going to get you, right? But we're just in the thick of it, right? And I don't know. I'm struggling, right? And I've been writing about this a bit, and unsatisfactorily from my own perspective. How do we, kind of in this room, how do we, in this discussion of architecture that's so dynamic and rich and engaging and culturally open and technologically just sort of out of control and, so many amazing things, how do we sort of sit with this fact that the kind of terms that we're operating with are still damaging not only our future but ourselves, right? How do we sit with the kind of the sort of RealTimeNature model, right? The kind of transformations to the world that we're very much a part of today, right? How do we shift our practices, right? And again, it's a bit too simple, but part of what I'm saying is that in these kind of cultural spaces of institutions and perhaps universities, we can begin to experiment with that a bit more aggressively, right? Experiment in the sense of like a design studio that does something interesting. Experiment in the sense of turn off the air conditioning, right? You just replace the facade, so it should still be fine. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, please. Right. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Scare you? No, mine. No, it's behind you. Thank you. I just wanted to kind of pick up on this notion of comfort or thermal comfort as a cultural practice, because I know you alluded to that, obviously. It's the metabolic rate, the forms optimization, the way that the practice is constructed relative to sort of a very rigid disciplinary boundaries of kind of orthographic construction, and then models of consultancies that kind of optimize the object of architecture within its context, right? And we had some previous discussions. We understand in some way that this doesn't work. We know the data. But at the same time, the kind of law since, 19th, 20th century, we're preconditioned towards the particular kind of comfort through that type of disciplinary architectural model. And I think that, I don't think that maybe the language needs to shift, and context of the comfort. I mean, there's so many studies, and I'm sure you're familiar with all of them. Is that the in some way the kind of expectation, our sensory framework, human sensory framework, is essentially conditioned based on the architecture that precedes it.
Right.
I mean, I had this kind of radical experience. I lived in Malaysia for a while, and first time I got out of the airplane, I thought I'm just gonna die.
Yeah.
Right. And then after a couple of months, I was like, oh, I'm not. And so there's a kind of a shift in behavioral shift that deals with sort of how we think about the different temporality of a work practice today, right? How we think about the boundary not as a single, but as maybe a layered system, right? All of these practices are kind of available to us within a discipline, and in some way, and I think that kind of there's a lot of scholarship around it as well. There's kind of a resistance of the practice, especially of the global north, that precipitates that model through the neoliberal system of capital, right? So in some way, where do you position the question to the discipline?
It feels totalizing, right? I mean, it feels like, may Frederick Jameson rest in peace, but it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of air conditioning, right? I mean, it's like, how do we live in this space, right? Without, or at least the buildings that we currently have that are so much not fit to purpose, right? But it's part of this, it's part of this question. I just keep pointing to this moment when we had a discussion about the kind of void of scholarship around the kind of intensity of these entanglements, right, and these parameters. Because, of course, to talk about comfort is also to talk about economic systems, is also to talk about radical inequities between North and South, is to talk about shipping, waste and other sorts of things off to other places, is to talk about consumer culture, is to talk about data storage, is, kind of all of these kind of aspects that, we're not even getting into the sort of data centers and their cooling needs, right? I'm not answering the question because I think you're just articulating a struggle that, means that I haven't really slept for more than 4 hours in the past 5 years, right? Which is just sort of, how do we frame this problem, right? Which is not a problem of which is not a sort of question of radical transformation, right? But is a question of a sort of shift in orientation for practice, right? And a shift of that temporal frame that helps us to kind of think through this urgency without sort of being overwhelmed by it, right? And I guess the kind of simple version, or the sort of reductive version, which I think is still valuable, how do we, and again, architects and students and educators, shift that orientation in the sense of really thinking about our work as the agents of decarbonization, right? It's one of the main things that we do, or should be doing as architects, right? And seeing every project as a sort of experimentation in carbon management, right? And carbon reduction and comfort resistance, yeah. Sorry, I'm not out of control, yeah.
Hi, Daniel. I guess I'm kind of curious about, I really appreciated where you showed how Boeing post the Second World War was trying to to redirect that state of emergency and steel and the surplus of energy and create cultures of steel energy architectural construction. And I'm thinking about Timothy Mitchell kind of like alluding to that same moment where there's a strategic alignment between fossil fuel industries and automobile industry, and there's a whole entire culture. There's an entire culture of energy consumption, and it's like a moment when engineers have produced really energy efficient 2-cylinder cars that go really fast and barely use any kind of fuel, and they're like, no, we need 8-cylinder. So I'm kind of thinking about those moments, like maybe we could say like the imperial dimensions of comfort that come out of these military origins. And the UN building, there's a kind of, when they underwent this renovation in the early 2000s after 9/11, it wasn't just having to bring the UN up to new forms of energy performance metrics, they also had to securitize it. And so that entire curtain wall was taken off and it was redetailed to be able to absorb a vehicle attack from First Avenue. And so the historic image of the UN curtain wall facade was absolutely maintained, but its performance for reasons of comfort, sustainability, and security were increased. And so I'm kind of curious that it's not just about, the comfort is no longer about the external environment, it's now about a kind of fortification. And we see this happening, that architecture is serving as a kind of way to create an imperial comfort state inside. And so as architects, if we're rethinking how we operate, and if we're thinking about architecture as media, as political, how do we confront those dimensions as well?
Phew, there's a lot going on. I guess I'll answer that this way. I think part of, and this is a little bleak, but I think, and it's back to this question, I guess he ran out, but I think that some of these towers will start to become fortifications, right? I mean, whether so directly and materially as you're talking about with the UN, but what I'm saying are sort of these horrible models of comfort excess and climate and sort of carbon mismanagement, right, are for most of the people that live there and work there and kind of see their lives in the future, havens, right, escape from, the kind of world outside that's falling apart. So, I think there's that aspect of whether it's through sort of material means or let's say just sort of cultural means, right, in which these buildings become sort of more and more sealed, right, and kind of impenetrable on thermal terms. But I think it also takes me back to something that was being said before, and I'm, and this is part of my struggle is I don't have a real sense of kind of how one would even imagine this kind of transformation, right? But it's a kind of question of having different aspirations, right? I mean, it's not just sort of expectations. And I think this question, the kind of physiological reality of sort of preconditioning and conditioning and repeated conditioning. I mean, how do we break out of that kind of lock-in effect, right? How do we kind of produce a different relationship to our thermal environment? How do we aspire for something else, right? How do we not aspire for that consistency, but rather, appreciate the kind of inconsistency and the dynamism, right, of a changing thermal realm. So that's kind of a weak answer to a very complicated question, but I hope it's, almost adequate, maybe. There's one other, where are we?
I'll go.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Amazing, compelling, not a but. So if we're going to shorthand, for the sake of dialogue or the sake of argument, the first building that you show us, the curtain wall, as some sort of spatial fix for this ballooning productive capacity for energy generation following the war, it then produces these cultural changes, cascading effects, and desires. So in this sense, is it as easy as shifting the culture towards an embrace of discomfort? Can that, in and of itself, refigure either petropolitics or counter the emerging economic incentives for, quote, green energy generation? What else might be required beyond reconfiguring our personal commitments to comfort or discomfort?
Well, architecture, right? I mean, I think this is the thing, right? I mean, obviously we can all, eat organic and go vegan and turn down the air conditioner, but it's, the buildings can collectivize that, right? I mean, that's one of the functions of the built environment is it can sort of allow these effects to resonate more broadly, right? So on the one hand, I think that's a question of how can, and I don't have the answer to that, I'm not a designer, this is not a question for me to answer, right? But how can we imagine an architecture that makes discomfort comfortable or okay or enough, right? I mean, there's this great book called The Good Enough Mother, right? That I think every parent should read, and kind of the good enough interior almost, right? Sorry, there's a first part to your question, though. Sorry, Annie, I'm starting, the jet lag is seeping in, but there's a first part to your question that I feel like okay, maybe I remember now, sorry, I remembered. But I think that one other sort of point that's, that we're struggling with collectively is that the model, and I'll just do this super quickly, it's much more complicated, but the model of sustainability in architecture is a model of efficiency. You're gonna get the same thing that you got, in 1995, Norman Foster will provide the same service that he provided in 1975, but it will require less energy, right? There's not a shift in I mean, again, I'm over-schematizing. And what Yamina Saheb, a brilliant policy analyst who's working for the UN on some of these reports, has clarified and kind of researched and understood, is that all of the carbon savings, all the energy savings that have emerged through the past couple decades of sustainability have been overwhelmed by just more stuff, more production, right? So we're building more efficiently, but we're just building more, right? So she has been championing this framing of sufficiency, right? And I think it's a really challenging set of questions for architects. Not only, are there kind of relationships to square footage and developers and fees, right? But the notion that we sort of have too much, right? And the notion that our project is not to sort of use energy more efficiently, but reduce demand, right? Just kind of turn it off, or again, turn off the air conditioning at the museum. That shifts, that's a bit less easy for us to kind of grapple with. So it's not to say that kind of whole history of sustainability is sort of not useful, but it's maybe useful in a different way, right? As a sort of model to work off of rather than continue, right? Yeah. And Karen's not here, but I'm writing a thing on that for her journal.
Really appreciate it, and I'm going to bounce off a little bit of Annie and also Dana, what you were mentioning about basically what I understand to be acclimatization. We're going to a new place. It can take us a certain amount of time to get our bodies accustomed to what that climate is actually like once we go outside of these hermetically sealed and or AC conditioned spaces. That brings up the question of time. How much time does it take you to acclimatize to a particular place? So when we're talking about this question of, what does it take to go for the good enough architecture, the suitable enough architecture, what is the role of time in that, whether it's the time that we kind of consider in terms of a building's lifespan, suitable over what span of time, and then also what ways does it challenge, for sure, our emphasis on efficiency, produce as much as possible, but also we're in a housing crisis right now. We need to get stuff built as fast as possible now. If we're trying to do things in a different way, what is the question of time in addressing the shift that needs to happen in the context of it needing to happen as fast, hopefully, as possible?
Yeah, I mean, again, these are all horrifying questions that keep me up all night, right? And because I think on the one hand, you've touched on, a real obstacle in our collective thinking, if I may, right? Which is the relationship between the housing crisis and the climate crisis, right? And the need for productivity, as you're recognizing, that's almost kind of directly parallel to the knowledge of the carbon cost of, the kind of embodied energy discourse, right? And lots, we could kind of spin off into a discussion about sort of embodied and operative energy and the decarbonization of the grid and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that, so this question of urgency is a really difficult one because I respect, obviously, I mean, not like anybody cares if I respect it or not, right? But the model that's encouraging the proliferation, I mean, we all know on the one hand that the housing crisis is not just a question of supply. Maybe that's the best way to get at it, right? I mean, if we recognize that the housing question is much more than a question of supply, then, we're kind of back to this demand management question. How much space do you need? Right, and then we start to get into, Soviet tactics of socializing mansions, right? And which is to say that, I mean, again, one of the familiar kind of discussions around the housing crisis is that, how many families can fit in a McMansion outside of Cleveland, for example, right? And but we're not going to walk in there and take over their houses or whoever we are, and et cetera, et cetera. But again, how do we begin to think about design interventions and broadly considered, I mean, not just sort of projects, but sort of scholarship and other questions about architecture culture. How do we begin to really kind of understand the sort of capacity of design interventions to transform that discussion, right? I mean, again, I'm not saying, well, maybe I am actually, but more people should live in McMansions. Yeah, I think I am saying that, right? And I mean, it's not more people within one McMansion, that's to say, right? Like a lot of people within one house. Because, how do we kind of overcome this absurdity, right? I mean, we know that we can live comfortably, happily, with pleasure, with a very different kind of constructed world around us. Right, and so it's not to say. I think part of what I'm really struggling with is, what will sort of generate this transformation, right? Which is is a kind of chicken or the egg thing, right? Do we turn off the air conditioning and then get used to it, and then it's like, oh, okay, I don't need that anymore, right? Or do we sort of walk around and pamphlet and flyer and sort of try to get everybody to change their minds, right? I mean, I'm being facetious on both sides, but again, I come back to. Are there specific means that architects have at their fingertips that can, if it's a bit too optimistic or naive to say that can kind of transform this equation, right, and bring different modes of comfort into the ways that we occupy spaces, that's maybe a little too much, but at least kind of turn the discussion, right, I mean, sort of keep it on our minds. I hope you'll all go home and decide that, I mean, it's not that hot today, but you can, just open the window at night if you're not staying in a hotel like I am, right? I mean, again, we all have these practices that we adapt and adopt and design in and think about differently in different times. I think we're
nearing the end. Unfortunately, I'm going to evacuate the space, but I'm going to let Matt Kennedy sort of take us to the end.
Take it home, Matt.
Hello. Thank you for the lecture, and thank you, organizers. It was a great day, a lot of great discussions. I'm not really sure how articulate this question is. I spent the summer in Mexico City, and that's a city I've spent a great deal of time in the last couple of years. Due to its altitude and its relatively temperate climate, this is an example, probably a very rare one, of one of the top 10 most populous cities in the world that doesn't rely greatly on air conditioning. When I first got back after the end of the last academic year in May, they were in the midst of a heat wave. We were in the midst of a heat wave, and it was very intense. And I was really disturbed, both in the apartments of friends, as well as in some very recently completed, very trendy, bars and restaurants. As you may know, Mexico City is going through a kind of high tourism and gentrification moment, to see a lot of mini splits, to see a lot of air conditioning sort of mandated by clients in new projects. And so I'm really disturbed to think, I think it's the 6th most populous city in the world, 8.5 million people within the federal district and 22 million in the municipal area. What happens when you have a megacity, or what has maybe been called a megacity at one point in urban discourse, suddenly becoming reliant on this technology? That's something that I can't imagine there are too many examples like that.
Yeah, I mean, people suffer, right? I mean, that's, this is the sort of the terror we face. I mean, I've been working on this type of material for about a decade. I went to Hong Kong for the first time 3 years ago, and I was just like, oh my God. Not like everything I think is wrong, but like the ramifications are so much scarier than I could have anticipated, right? I mean, beautiful city, amazing, right? But the kind of the ways in which air conditioning is built into the urban fabric, and the kind of inequities, who gets it and who doesn't, and the the increasing heat. I mean, not to mention other sorts of climate events that are playing out there. I mean, when you were telling your story, I was thinking about the athletes that brought their air conditioners to Paris, right, because of the famously ecological buildings that they had to inhabit. But I don't. I don't know. I mean, this is where it gets. It's good we're at the end, because this is where I start to get a little dark, right? I mean, it doesn't end well for us. If this is the dynamic that we're occupying, right? In the sense that, air conditioning is necessary for well-being in many places. I mean, in a heat wave in Mexico City, in the summer in many parts of the world, across the tropical zone and many parts of the global south in particular, right? So I think it's a nuanced notion. Clearly I'm pushing back against our reliance on air conditioning, but it's our reliance, which is to say, those of us who have benefited from it, and again, forgive me if I'm overlooking anybody's, sense of self. We don't need it, right? Or periodically, episodically, we need it, right? But there are others who need it for very different reasons, right? Again, when you were referring to the CCA, this sounds a bit to the side, but I remember a really interesting discussion there of the conditioning of the archive, and what if you had to kind of rate it, right? This stuff is really important, and if the energy gets too high, we'll only condition that stuff, right? And I'm saying that because I think there's a similar sort of implicit index, globally around sort of people and lives and situations. We probably want to keep hospitals well conditioned for a number of obvious reasons. Archives and museums, maybe schools, and et cetera. One could kind of construct a list. But what really scares me, if we're going to go there, and Yamina Sahabigan plays this out through a great talk she gave at a Beyond Growth conference. At some point they're going to stop working, right? The humidity capacity in particular is often being pushed to the limits, and especially, again, as many of you know, the question of heat stress is really about not being able to cool down at night, or not, one of the main factors. And it's beginning to be the case in some environments where air conditioners won't help, right? So the story will go, Mexico City will add a bunch of air conditioners because the global tourist population wants it, and then this is again back to aspirations. The people who live there or others, they aspire to that way of life as well. So the air conditioning will accumulate, the climate will continue to deteriorate, and eventually some people will have it and some people won't, and then it'll stop working, and then we get to the real fun stuff. That was the dark part, the stop working. Yeah, it's a good way to end.
I think it's a wonderful way to end. Round of applause for Daniel. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Daniel, and everybody else who spoke today and made today possible. I want to invite our speakers and also doctoral students to the reception that's now occurring for all of you in room 123. And yeah, thank you all again, and thank you to Matt and Brian in the booth for holding it down today, and to Sarah back there as well.